Tim here, and hope everything is going well for you during this holiday period, and Happy New Year. Welcome to my live demo for our Patreon, for my Patreon friends for January 2022. So this is a live demo for my Patreon members only, and is being recorded. So after the live demo, you will get a little notification from the Crowdcast system with a link to the recording, which will allow you to play it back as many times as you want to. The Crowdcast system here is integrated with Patreon. That's why I use it. And also, it should be very simple for attendees to register and watch live and play back the recording. It's the same URL for your registration and viewing live and watching recording as many times as you want to. When I do finish, though, please just let the system process itself, so it will create a like a higher definition recording for you. So those of you on the relevant Patreon membership level or tier, you get to send me a photograph of your painting, and I will give you an individual critique of your painting in writing or video as a short little video, depending on what tier you're on. So on this live event, you can paint along with me, or you might want to just watch me do the demo, ask me loads of questions, and paint in your own time afterwards. It's completely up to you. And also remember the community tab that we've got in Patreon to share your painting with other Patreon members. We'd love to more in a public way on Patreon share that image there. Now, the audio part of this demo is one way only. Your microphone is on mute. I've just seen that. It's a beautiful summer's day here in Auckland, New Zealand. I'm very jealous. We're wet and soggy in the UK. Audio is one way only. If you've got a question, please click on the Ask a Question button. I'll do my best to answer that at certain stages of painting. I would just give out your first name or the name that you've registered with. I think most people are registering with their real names. So I'll give out your first name to protect your identity and answer as best I can. And if you've attended previous demos, you'll see that I paint in stages. So between those stages, there'll be relevant opportunity for me to answer your questions. So click on the Ask a Question button at the bottom of your screen somewhere, depending on what device you're watching on. Pop your questions in there. I'll try and read them out at logical stages during the demo. So pop your question into Ask Question section, not the chat window. I will most likely miss it there. Now, you will see also the source photo if you haven't picked it up already. Thank you very much to Joseph for this lovely photograph of Moscow. Joseph, he really does take really good photographs that are very paintable, nearly every single one. It just catches the light, and it's very adaptable subjects for watercolor. So thanks very much, Joseph, for your kind sharing of this image of Moscow. And you can pick that up on the green source photo button. Just click on that and to view it or download it to your device. Right, then the subject for January 2022 is Moscow. I haven't been to Moscow myself. Joseph obviously has. This is his photograph. Thanks very much again. I believe we're looking towards one of the iconic areas of Moscow, the Red Square and these lovely spires here, punctuating the background there. But from a watercolor point of view, I was quite attracted to this scene, and in fact, one or two others as well. And on Patreon, we ran a little poll over the last couple of weeks or so, just asking for everyone's vote on what they would like to do for January 22, and this was the winner. So the winning one What do I like about it? Well, it's got lots of lights and darks. I mean, look how dark that plinth is there, the base of these lovely antique lights. A lot of contrast between the dark lights and the bright sky. We've got foreground interest with this balustrade here, with these round finials catching the light. The light's coming from the left, as you can guess. The finials catching light. So there's three of those. Nicely spaced, actually. I might actually just move them closer together because I think they're just, particularly that one, is just a little bit too far over on the right-hand side. So I'm going to just adjust the scene a little bit. We've got a lot of contrast there. Look at that finial against that dark background. Lovely. Figures as well. We've got, so the foreground, we've got this architectural detail. Fairly tricky, I guess. I think in this, the foreground and the background are the trickiest things. Maybe third, for a third one, these lovely antique street lights here. But just going back to the foreground, these finials, we've got the top rail of the balustrade, we've got these balusters as well. Look at the pattern of the light creeping in between these balusters there. The bottom rail we can hardly see. All right, sort of merges into the dark shadows. Bit of light hitting the balustrade there. Then in the middle ground we've got these figures. There's horizontal bands of light coming across the street. Lots of warms and cools. Look at the warmth of the light hitting the balustrade there, and a little bit of warmth on the street. That guy with the red jacket, reds and cools dotted around, and then these cool blue shadows coming across the scene, and then creating it against some nice contrast as it hits different objects. In the middle ground, then we've got beyond the people, we've got the lamps with their ornate bases, some catching the light, others not, silhouetted against the sky. And then going beyond that, another area of difficulty, a challenge, is that architecture. And the more you look at that architecture, the more you're just going to get wound up by how difficult it is with all those windows and the details on top of the rooftops and the domes and a bit of shine there. But we want to try and simplify that background. Quite a simple sky, graded wash, fairly dark at the top, or darker at the top, nice and light down towards the bottom. So I'll just describe my materials, and then I'll go on to the little thumbnail sketch I did just a few minutes ago before starting this session. Materials, paper, which can be any good quality watercolor paper. I'm using Saunders Waterford. There are other brands available. This is 300 grams, cold press, 15 inches by 11 inches. Paints, I'm using Jackman's Art Materials handmade watercolor paints. I've got neutral tint, burnt umber, burnt sienna, yellow ochre, viridian green, cobalt green, cerulean blue, cobalt blue, ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, cadmium red, light red, cadmium orange, cadmium yellow, and there's a lavender down there. 3 mixing wells. And my water is over the right there, and there's a sponge over to the right as well. Brushes, I am thinking about using a large mop brush, hopefully with a good sharp edge there for painting around things. Then I may use a softer brush. I shall just extract that loose hair that's just escaping. Annoyingly, it's coming from the middle of the brush, so I've just lost another hair from the point, but such is life. Anyway, fairly good point, good water holding ability. Number 12, synthetic round brush, again with a fairly good point, and a smaller synthetic brush and possibly a rigger towards the end. Thumbnail sketch, as I sometimes do, a little planning, a bit of planning on this picture with, I just used a medium felt tip pen on a bit of scrap paper and just really sketched out an idea about the composition, but also more importantly for me, I like to think about, with watercolor, the steps in which I'm going to go through. So these numbers represent the sequence in which I'm going to paint, with, of course, outlined here the main objects. So we've got these lamps silhouetted against the sky, different sizes, different heights, the background, bit of middle ground with some shadows going across the scene. Then in the foreground, we've got the finials, the top rail, the balusters, bottom rail, a rail coming towards us here, and a fairly simple foreground. So I'm going to do the sky first, then come down, do just the base color for the foreground. Then when that's dry, I might actually do a little bit of lifting out. While that's still damp, I might plonk in a little bit of color for these background buildings here, the yellows, that red. I'm thinking about that. Just give a little bit of softness and base color for those background buildings. So 3, some shadows going across the middle of the scene. And when I look at the scene, sorry to keep going back to the photo, but I just think about shapes here as we go across, the shapes of those shadows, just thinking to yourself, they're not buildings, they're not bushes, they're not the base of a lamp. Just think about the actual shape of them, and we're just sort of connecting them all together. So fairly dark shadows going across the middle there. What else? 4, providing some darker values to the balustrade here, the top rail, balusters, finial, the details in that foreground. 5, there might be some, thinking about the this brown base to the lamp there. I might actually move number 5 a little bit further forwards in the sequence. And then number 6, the details. Well, just some figures across the little figures across the scene, and just finer details of the architectural stuff with a smaller brush. So that's the plan. Right. Are there any questions before I start with the outline drawing? I think there's just one question here. So, David, we generally work from photographs on Patreon. Do you prefer that? And what advantage or disadvantage does it have over working direct plein air? What a very good question. Plein air versus working with photographs. Well, it's lovely to be out and about, enjoying the outdoors and visiting places. Maybe with the current situation, it may not be completely possible, but it's lovely to be out in your own location, and even within your own area. There's probably loads of things that you could go out and paint, and nothing beats that. But well, in the UK, David, as you know, the climate sometimes prevents us doing that, and so we have to resort to photographs. But with photographs, you can't really sort of immerse yourself. This scene here, I like the scene, but I've got no connection with it. And I think photographs, if they're your own photograph and you're familiar with the scene, then that's better than painting from a photograph that you don't know where it is, it's not your photograph, and there's no emotional connection with it. So that's one aspect of it. And then another dimension is working with, from a photograph, the potential for getting too tight in painting. I like to paint a loose way, and I often find, possibly with a scene like this, I'm tempted, the more I look at it, the more I study that photograph, the more things I find, and in my own mind I'm changing my mind about the process and things to include, and that could get me sort of bogged down in the whole process. I like to be a bit more loose and flexible and quick, and basically trying to create my impression of that scene. And I'm not trying to copy the photograph. When you look at when you paint from a photograph, invariably, particularly if you're a beginner, you end up trying to copy the photograph, and that is, I think, definitely not what you should be doing. You should be just interpreting the scene and making it your own, and trying to be artistic in that sort of creative process. So thanks very much, David, for that question. Right, don't think there's any more questions. I'll start with the drawing if I can find my pencil. Here we go. Right. Well, first of all, I will draw in those finials. I think they're quite an important element in the composition. These 3 finial balls here. Now, bit of perspective, looking at the where Joseph was and photographing the scene, I bet that is pretty much eye level there. So the top of that finial is pretty much level with that finial. You might agree, and there's some other details that are strengthening that line there, that light there, the line of that level of the base of the lamp. This goes up a little bit uphill, and then we're going up slightly uphill there, but pretty much everything else, so loads of horizontal. So let's get in those finials first of all, and I was going to shorten the distance between the finials, but let's get one down in this area here. I'm going to lightly draw it first of all. I'll go in a little bit darker when I think it's about right. So finial number 1, finial number 2, let's have that over here, slightly smaller because it's a little bit further away, about that sort of size. And then finial number 2 is around about there, smaller still, but it is actually, let's just move it. I want to make sure I don't put anything dominant in that central line. So I'll put that there, a little bit lower than this one. Now below the finial, we've got a platform, a cap, or whatever it's called. So I'm not an architect. I don't know what the terms are. And there's a little bit of light hitting that left-hand side. Now, as we come over to the right of that finial, the top rail is going just slightly uphill. Like that. There's a cap here. And this top rail Goes like that. Don't want too much detail in the foreground. The top rail connecting these two finials is a little bit like that. The column below that finial is there. And then bottom of that top rail and below the top rail, there's the gaps between the balusters. I'm just depicting those as little ovals, if you like, for now. There's the bottom rail. Then we've got a bit of a sort of zigzag here. There's that top rail, and then the top rail going over to the third finial, the more distant one there. Actually, that finial can be a little bit lower. There might be plenty of usage of the rubber on this one. Let's put that one there. Just a little bit lower. Okay. I'll just strengthen up this finial here, trying to make it as circular as I can, and then hopefully you'll see those lines a bit more. And then number 2 over here. Right, background, or sorry, middle ground. The far side of this square here. So there's people and there's those horizontal shadows going across this little open area. And there's a lamp framing that left-hand side. We can just see part of it there. There's a first spire here. That's this one. So I'm now just drawing the outline of these buildings in the background. So one there. And then some more spires there. There's a building here. And now this main lamp here, the base and the lamp itself, the post. So let's get that in. So just move this. So that's the red tower, and that first very dark base of that lamp, and then then the one to the right, slightly lighter, browner. That can create a little bit of contrast with that other finial there. Continuing the background, there's some buildings, don't know what they are, some shadow in the foreground, and another lamp on that right-hand side. There we are. Bit of a scribble just to define where that lamp is. Now this one here with the brown base, just put in that post. I'm going to draw in the main lamp first. Let's get this one in. And then the lights. Like that. So there's a group of 4 lights in the middle, then one either side. This one with the brown base has got, again, sort of 4 lights at the top, but then there's one there and one there, and they're joined with some rather ornate little arms that hold them up. Now there's another light here, a little bit further away. It looks like it's a similar distance to that, similar sort of height and size. So that will be maybe around about here. You can see that we're just moving things to get a balance to the composition. Looks like there's a lot more lights on this one actually. And then another one just over here. Let's put this one there, really distant one. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And let's just think about the background buildings. So there's a tower here with a shiny cap to it. That's the red one. The other red one is there, a little bit further away, and beyond that, just a few little buildings, but not too much detail. Now, in this open area, we have some figures. And they're all sort of about the same size. The tops of the heads are around about the halfway point of these finials. So let's get one in first of all. That's one figure. And another one. Some over here, keeping the tops of the heads level. All right, so around about there maybe. Have this one walking into the scene. And a more distant one there. Maybe another one there. All right, so I'm nearly there with my drawing. Try not to put in too much detail. Get in the main objects, just to find where the strong lines are for the outline of these different shapes. Getting right, particularly these finials, the top rail, that angle, the balusters, the gaps between the balusters as well. They look like, to me, they look like sort of spearheads. Again, if you try and think, well, that's not a rail, that's not a horizontal rail and bottom rail, and then these fancy balusters between them. Just think of shapes that might make it easier for you to think how you might attempt that scene. Over on the right hand side, we'll keep it fairly abstract. There's lots of shapes and kiosks and things going on there. We don't want to bother too much about that. Okay, I think I've got the composition sort of right in my mind. That balance, there's no dominating side, nothing dominant in the middle, spacing out these street lamps as best I can. Not too much detail in the top there. Just leave that till the painting stage. Right, that's it done. Are there any questions before I start painting then? Hopefully I won't need that anymore. So I'm going to start painting with a mop brush. Actually, I'm going to pre-wet the paper first of all, just to make sure I can get quite a nice smooth wash, particularly with that sky. Yes, let's just pre-wet the sky first of all. So just an even application of clear water with my mop brush here. Just take a minute or two to do this, and we should get a smoother wash. Go over the skyline, over those buildings. Just let that soak in a little bit. Even application. There. Now, sky, a little bit darker at the top, a bit lighter at the bottom. So let's put in some cerulean blue here, starting at the top, come down to the bottom. And there's a little bit of, I think there's a little bit of rosy alizarin crimson in the bottom of the sky. Let's put that in. A little bit of pink there. and then continue to make the sky just a little bit more intense to the top. Cerulean blue, particularly in that right hand side there. So I'm just sweeping my brush from left to right like that. Now I'll come back to some of those buildings in a minute. I'm now going to add in some base color to the foreground, and I want to keep it fairly warm, particularly in the foreground. It will some warms and cools. Let's just add in a little bit of burnt sienna, cadmium orange, paint around some of these people. This finial here, we can make that orange. Bit more burnt sienna. Burnt sienna, cadmium orange, and you can see my strokes of my brush are a little bit different to where I was when I was doing the sky. They're more sort of crisscross, covering the paper. And let's add in a little bit of coolness into this, a little bit of cobalt blue. I will go darker in the foreground here. Right, now back to these buildings. First of all, the buildings in the background. First of all, I want to lift off a little bit of color in this building here. Lift off a little bit of that sky wash to go back to some bright white paper. So I'm just picking up a synthetic brush, a damp synthetic brush, just to lift off some of that color there. There's another tower just to the left of it. Small synthetic brush, pick up a little bit of yellow. I can see a lot of yellow in those distant buildings. So a bit of my cadmium yellow, might be a little bit too bright, but just a few little specks of yellow in there. And then background buildings on the right hand side. Like that. Those red spires now, there's one there and one there. I'm going to choose a little bit of alizarin crimson. not that deep. Bit of light red. Try and tone it down a bit. Bit of light red. Ooh, that is quite bright. So I don't want it too bright. I was going to bring it forwards, of course, from a visual point of view. So that's that tower. And then a little bit of light red for this other tower. There. I might just lift off a little bit of color on the left-hand side of that finial. And likewise, just a little bit on that one. Make it a bit lighter on that left-hand side. And let's go with this one as well. There we go. Well, so far so good. I think I've achieved stage one, just really covering up the paper, except for those areas that I do need to keep a little bit lighter, or I don't know exactly how I'm going to color these figures. They could be darker, they could be left lighter, so just painted around those. I've left a little bit of light paint, white paper there. Do you see that horizontal band there? Maybe that could be a little bit of light coming straight across beyond the middle ground, between the middle ground and the background. Maybe we can make something of that. Can I lift off more of that? Let's try a smaller brush. Make sure it's very clean, of course. I just squeeze out any color that's on there. Make sure it's very clean. There we are. Likewise, can I just lift out a little bit of color there? So dampen the brush, squeeze out any of the paint. There we are. So I'm just going to let this dry now. If there's any questions, please pop those into the Ask a Question. Click on the Ask a Question button. If not, I'm just going to get out my hairdryer just to speed up the process. I'm not, where I am now is not particularly dry, and that could take a long time. I want to make sure the paper is really dry before I get to the next stage. So hang on a second. Just let the paper cool down a bit. Don't want to paint on warm paper. So that's drying. Well, that's dried quite nicely now. Next, let's just review the plan. So we've done number one, we've done number two. Really now it's sort of background and this shadow coming across the middle ground there that will just start to form shapes and give the painting a little bit of depth. for this, I'm going to use, what size brush? I'm tempted between a bigger brush or a smaller one. Let's go with this one. First of all, then, some rooftops. I'm going to start from the left-hand side, just creating some shadow on these buildings, over to the right, and painting this brown base here, and then painting the shadows, the shadows of those buildings across the middle ground. So these rooftops here in the background, they're just very simple shapes. Triangles, squares. And I'm just picking up any color in the palette. Here, the value is the most important thing, not to make it too dark, but dark enough just to define some shadows. So any color that's in that central area there, I'll just preserve that lighter area, and then the shadow comes down to the left hand side of this red tower. We've got the brown. Let's get in this brown base. So I picked up burnt sienna, but it's a little bit too vibrant, so I'm toning it down a bit with a little bit of ultramarine blue. And just the base here, try and make it fairly symmetrical as well. And I've come down to that finial, the first finial. I want to paint around fairly carefully to preserve that edge. Now back to the background. Something cool. Over to the right hand side. There we go. This white tower has got a little bit of gold or something on the top of it. It's a lovely bright tower. Some of you may know what it's called, but I don't. There we are. That will do for that. So just a little bit of darkness left and right, and a shiny little bit in the middle. Now, next, working across this middle ground and getting into some of these darks. I want to make sure this base is dry first of all. I'm just going to get the hairdryer out just to dry this little section up here. So I want hard edges at this stage, you see. So I don't want any soft edges. I want to make sure everything's dry. So excuse the hairdryer. That'll be drier still by the time I get over to it. Continuing with this number 12 synthetic brush, and recap, I'm going to start from left-hand side. I'll put in these lamps here on the left hand that gives me a little bit of a frame on that side, and then just continue across this middle ground with the bases of these lamps here, the posts, and then just continue over to the right-hand side. Add a bit of darkness to that right-hand side as well. And then we'll take a little breather. Okay, something dark to start off with. Neutral tint. Bit of burnt umber. Bit of ultramarine blue as well. And that just a silhouetted shape of the light and the support to the light. Now there's a bit of foliage going across the middle, bit of ultramarine blue, bit of cadmium yellow, and that might be just a little bit too dark. So I'm just introducing some various shades of green, some light, some dark, and then come down to that line there. All right, that's where I'm going to go down to with this. Paint around these figures again, just to keep my options open about how I'm going to render those. We're up to, there's a middle building here. Not sure if this is anything to do with the metro there, or looks like some sort of transportation building. continue on down to those figures and the round finial. Now I need to be very careful here because this is an important shape. I want to get that perfectly round, or as perfect as I can get it. Continue over. Pick up a little bit of cobalt blue now, just to go a little bit cooler in this middle section. Very carefully around that middle ball, the middle finial. Down to the top rail. And the base of this very dark base here. Pick up a little bit of neutral tint, burnt sienna for this one, and just the base, not the actual post itself. Trying to make it symmetrical. Down to the bottom, there's a wider section there. Now, there's a bit of shadow on the brown column. So that's that right-hand side that's in the shade, and then down to that finial that's catching the light. Beyond that shady side, there's some trees. Maybe it's another road or pathway that goes down there. And then really abstract shapes. On that right-hand side. This roof here needs to be a little bit darker. Don't worry about putting in too much detail. Okay. And let's put in, oh, it's too wet there. Hang on a second. Let's get in the base of this light in there. Like that. Okay. I'll put a little bit more detail in some of the background buildings towards the end. But that's that middle bit, the main bit of that middle bit done, except for, of course, those lights. Right, next, this other challenging area, the balustrade, the railings here, the gaps between the balusters, how we're going to do those. A little bit of shadow on the right-hand side of the finials here. And then just basically finish off that foreground. And then I'll put in these shadows and those figures. That's the plan. Are there any questions, anyone so far? No? Okay. Right. I think I'll keep with this brush. And this number 12 brush. There's a little bit of shadow on just below that finial there. And then a little bit of shadow on the right hand side of that finial. There's some shadow coming from, I guess it's from an object over here. It's casting a shadow across and going over the balustrade there. So that's in this middle section. Bit of cool shadow, cobalt blue. There. Now, this finial ball here. So get in some shadow on that right hand side, then to soften it up, little brush, a damp brush, and just tease it out. To get that soft edge. Adding a bit more darker color just to strengthen particularly the shadow just in that lower part there. It's actually a bit of a hard edge to it down there. Just use my fingertips to smudge things a bit more. There we go. Now back to my number 12. And connect that finial to the column. Strong edge here. And then just up to the balusters coming this way. Now let's do these balusters. This is quite tricky to get the light coming between those balusters. First of all, a bit of shadow or shade on this side of the top railing. Cool shadow again, cobalt blue. Bit of ultramarine blue. But it's too cool. Just warm it up a little bit. And check my brush. And then a straight edge up to the other finial. and then down to the bottom of this top rail. And then the top of these balusters, and then the bottom, over to this side. And then coming down towards the bottom rail now. Getting a straight vertical edge there. And the foreground, this immediate foreground is going to be really quite sort of abstract, but getting that edge there. And I'll strengthen those up with a few dark lines later on. This is a cap. So I'm just painting this sort of middle cap here in the foreground. Right, finial on this right-hand side. Something dark to go over the right-hand side and then soften that edge. Like that. Okay, are there any questions at all? Right, Is everyone who's actually painting along with me on this one? I'm just lifting out just a few little areas here, just to create a little bit of mystery in that space. Okay, shadows coming across this open area here, this place, and then I'm going to put in those figures, drop the figures into them. Right, let's stick with this brush. I need some nice horizontal lines, negatively painting around the figures and these finial boards. That's going to define those shapes a little bit more. Think about the pattern, also the angle of these lines. They're fairly horizontal there, but they're a little bit more angled here. All right. Pick up the same cooler shadow mix, bit of cobalt, and check my brush. So let's get in. Up to the shadow and then up to the finial, and then continue on the other side. Up to that column there, and then another line. Try and make the thicknesses of these lines a little bit different each time. Maybe a thinner line. So perhaps a bit thicker as we come down towards us and up to there's a light front edge, leading edge of that column. And of course, some of these people, they're creating shadows as well. There. Let's drop some people in there. Small brush, and start off first of all with a little flesh color, a little bit of light red, and just a few of them just where we might see their faces. Let's get in the guy with the bright red jacket, maybe here. Hopefully my cadmium red will do it justice. There we are. Just concentrate really on the top part of the body and that red. Just put that into other areas as well. Let's have some darker figures. So neutral tint, a little bit of burnt sienna, neutral tint, and perhaps this figure here be a bit darker, and then have another darker one over there. Just filling in some of these gaps that, well, there's just a bit too many. Right, next. Okay, next, what's left to be done? The lamps, the posts, certainly some darker lines just to strengthen up some of the architectural details on these balustrades. So let me just see if there's any questions. Oh, there's one question. Hang on a second. So Ravi, hi Tim, would it help to add tiny more detail in the foreground, or will you do it later at a detail set? I don't put too much detail in here, but I will put in a few lines, Ravi, on this bottom rail here, just to define that. And we can see below the bottom rail, just something going on there. So I will add in a few lines there, but not too much. All right. Lamps then. Sticking with my smaller synthetic brush, I'm going to first of all do the glazing of the lamps. Now, what color would that be? It's darker than the sky. It's a sort of chalky, opaque color. So I've got a bit of white gouache here. I've got a bit of lavender. If you've got a bit of white paint, maybe mix it with a little bit of burnt sienna or something darker just to darken it a little bit, but to give you that sort of chalky, opaque kind of color. I'll pick up a little bit of this white gouache here, maybe a tiny bit of this lavender as well. And then this is just the glazing. We'll go around the outline of these with the darker ironwork. Right, main one here. So there's only about 5 lanterns on this one. There, and then a few more on this one. And then, oops. And then finally, this far right one. There. Right, while that's drying a little bit, I'll just add in a few more details to the background buildings. So first of all, let's make this spire a little bit dark of this red. This red tone, a tiny bit of shadow on the right hand side. Now these windows, I'm not painting in every single window, but just a few of them to give the impression of that side of the building. And then this white tower here. And the red tower. There's a little bit of yellow going across this building. In fact, there's a bit of yellow over here. There's a figure or something over there. Okay, so I think my glazing and my lights are dry now. So another tricky, intricate bit, painting in these very beautiful ornate lamps with a small synthetic brush. Now, it's dark, but not black. So I'm picking a bit of neutral tint. Let's put a bit of burnt sienna in there. Neutral tint, burnt sienna, maybe a bit of ultramarine blue, and not too dark for the furthest one. So the tops of the lights, something going on in the middle, and then the post. Like that. And then next one along, maybe go a little bit darker, ultramarine blue, bit of neutral tint. 2 outside ones. And two supports. Connecting the post to the base. There we go. And now the main one, this main one in the middle here. And we go a little bit lighter with that one, and then darker for that final one. First of all, tops of the lamps. Now we can see a bit more detail in these. So it's got almost like a semicircular top to them with a little sort of ball or embellishment on the top. And in this one, we can see the little lines, the frame of the lights. So this one is going to be a little bit darker, a bit more water, not too dry. And then a straight line down, goes a little bit wider to the base. Now there's a sort of S shape here. There we go. And little sort of spiral inside that. There's some object there, looks like a spotlight or something. There's a CCTV camera here. We'll ignore that. Right, this lighter one, let's wash off that darker color, pick up a bit of more of a burnt sienna for this one. Tops to the lights. Got like a little sort of lip on these lights. Little sort of, oops, a little lip on them. And this one's different again. It's got two kind of supports coming out. and post down to what looks like some sort of a vase or very ornate base to it. There. Right, final one. Not too dark. Let's go a little bit cooler with this one. Tiny bit of neutral tint, bit of cobalt blue. And this one has got, again, it's got quite a lot of lights in it, but they're all joined together and it's very difficult to see the individual lights. And there's a base. I've just spotted a base to this one. Let's have the base around about there. There we go. Right, well, I've got my small brush, a few more of these lines to strengthen up the balustrade, the architectural details here. And then I might use a little bit of white paint just to pick up on a few highlights. So starting from the left-hand side here, my small brush. There we are. Looks a little bit better. Now this top rail, let's add a few more lines to. You see there's lots of these little thin lines here. That's just going to make it a little bit more realistic and ornate. Now I need to be quite careful with these lines to make sure they're nice and straight. So let's get in a line at the bottom of that top rail first, and then make sure I've got a good point. Get in a few more at the top. There we are. And then down to the bottom rail. Well, there's a sort of base of the bottom rail is there. And I lifted out that area. Let's just miss that out. Continue over there. And just a few abstract marks there. So just a few lines, not too many. Now, this middle area, there are a few lines, of course, here, but these are not as dark. So same brush, make sure I've got a good point, and a few lines to define that top rail. A few just to define the balusters on there. There's a few lines just beyond. This base here might just need a few more embellishments just to make it a bit more ornate. What else? Could I add in a few more figures? With dark paint, almost pure neutral tint. Maybe there's a few, or there's a little light patch there. Let's make that into a figure, and then maybe another one there. A few more here. Maybe some distant ones. This tower is not quite right. Let's just extend that out. That's a bit better. There are a few little lines. You might want to put some of those in just to connect up some of these posts together. I could use my rigger brush here. A bit of lost and found. Let's have this light having a cable. Like that. There we go. Not too many. Now, final bit to this. I can just see a question coming in. Hang on a second. So Joseph, I'd like to confirm. So Joseph's asking, I'd like to confirm that mix more water with the neutral tint black to obtain a less saturated black would be a bad idea. because the paint would not be enough pigmented. Yes, it could be a little bit sort of weak. Yeah, so I very often mix the neutral tint with a ultramarine blue or a burnt sienna or maybe an alizarin crimson, just to give it a bit more body, but not so black. Right, a little bit of white paint for some of these figures here, just to give them a bit of highlight to the heads and the shoulders. I use a small rigger brush for this and just dampen it first of all. Squeeze off any excess moisture, and then white paint, white gouache, and just see if we can highlight some of these figures a bit more. So a few there. Guy with the red jacket. Some lurking in the shadows. And over on the right hand side, just a few over there. Trouble is, when I've got the white paint, I then spot other things that could be white. There's a few little white poles over there. Maybe some details on the tops of the buildings. Right, I think I'm done. There may be some more I could do to it with some of the details on the balustrades, but I think I'm done with this. So there's no questions. I'll just wrap up the demo. Well, hopefully, let's just review the end painting and the source photo, Joset's photo. Moscow, very complicated scene, especially with the background, the lamps, these balustrades here, finials, top rail, bottom rail, balusters, and the light. That was particularly tricky, trying to get that light. Almost try and think of shapes, they're almost like spearheads or skittles or something like that. Yeah, getting the shapes right, getting the initial drawing right before starting to paint, and then it's just a tonal exercise in the lights and darks. So these dark lamps against the lighter background, that very dark base of the middle dominant, the main lamp there. Contrast the light against the light of the finials against the darker background, which hopefully I've been able to achieve there. That one could have been a little bit lighter. That was actually one of the lightest ones there. That could have been a bit lighter. Anyway, thanks for everyone who's been watching live. Thanks for your patience. I hope you enjoyed the experience. So remember, those on Patreon, remember to look out for a posting of this project in Patreon with the full instructions for sending me a photo of your painting. Again, if you're on the tier where you get a critique on Patreon. But thanks very much again. Enjoy the rest of your week, and I'll catch up with you soon on the next live stream. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.